The Bible you were shown is not the Bible that was written. That's not an opinion. That's history. For centuries, European institutions controlled which manuscripts were copied, which images were preserved, and which identities were emphasized. And in that process, one thing was systematically altered: the appearance of the people in the Bible. Here's the point they never say clearly. Most biblical figures came from regions where people were dark-skinned, yet they are almost always portrayed as white. That alone should raise questions. The prophets of the Bible did not come from Europe. They came from North Africa, the Levant, and the Horn of Africa, regions populated by melanated people long before modern racial categories existed. This isn't speculation, it's geography. Abraham came from Mesopotamia. Moses was raised in Egypt. Solomon ruled over Israel at the crossroads of Africa and Asia. The prophets lived under African dynasties, traded with African kingdoms, and interacted constantly with African peoples. Yet open almost any modern Bible illustration, church mural, or Sunday school book, and what do you see? Pale skin, straight hair, European facial structure. That disconnect is not accidental. Let's be precise. Ancient Hebrew texts never describe prophets as white, ever. What they do describe are physical traits consistent with people of color, hair texture, skin tone comparisons, and regional identifiers that modern readers conveniently ignore. Take Moses. The Bible describes Moses marrying a Cushite woman. Cush was not symbolic. Cush was a real African kingdom south of Egypt associated with dark-skinned people. The text does not treat this as shocking. It treats it as normal. Now ask yourself something simple. If Moses lived among Africans, married into Africa, and operated within African-controlled Egypt, why is he painted like a European monk? Because when Christianity spread into Europe, it didn't just bring theology. It brought image control. Visuals matter. Most people don't read ancient manuscripts. They absorb belief through paintings, statues, and icons. And once European powers dominated the church, those images began to reflect European faces, not historical reality. This is where the whitewashing happened. Not overnight, not through one conspiracy, but through repetition. Generation after generation grew up seeing prophets who looked nothing like the regions they came from. Over time, those images replaced the truth. And here's the key point most people miss. Changing the image changes the authority. When prophets are portrayed as European-looking, their wisdom is subconsciously associated with Europe. Power shifts, legacy shifts, ownership shifts. This isn't about modern race politics. This is about historical control. And the evidence didn't disappear. It was simply pushed aside. Ancient Ethiopian manuscripts preserve biblical figures with dark skin. Early Coptic Christian art in Egypt shows prophets with African features. Even early Roman descriptions note foreign, dark-complexioned figures coming from the east and south. But those sources rarely make it into mainstream churches. Instead, the Western Church standardized a version of the Bible that looked familiar to Europeans, not accurate to antiquity. And once that version became dominant, questioning it became uncomfortable. Because if the prophets weren't white, then history wasn't centered where we were taught it was. And that's the real reason this topic was softened, blurred, and avoided. This video isn't about emotion. It's about alignment. Aligning belief with geography, archaeology, and original context. In the next part, we'll get even more specific. We're going to look at descriptions straight from Scripture, not modern artwork, and break down what they actually say about the appearance of biblical figures. And once you see it, plainly, it becomes very hard to unsee. Let's stop talking vibes and get specific. If people were whitewashed, the proof has to be in the text itself, not opinions, not modern art. And it is. The Bible does describe physical traits. They're just rarely highlighted in sermons. Let's start with hair. In multiple ancient Near Eastern cultures, hair texture was a marker of ethnicity. Hebrew and Egyptian sources distinguish straight hair from woolly or tightly coiled hair. When descriptions appear, they matter. In Numbers 12, Moses is criticized for marrying a Cushite woman. The complaint isn't about foreign politics. It's about appearance and ethnicity. Cushites were known throughout the ancient world for dark skin and African features. This wasn't metaphorical. Classical Greek writers, Egyptian reliefs, and Assyrian records all describe Cushites as visibly dark. Now here's the part people avoid saying plainly. The text does not describe Moses as visually different from the Cushite woman. That matters. If Moses had been European-looking, the marriage would have been framed as radically foreign. Instead, the story treats it as socially tense, not biologically shocking. That implies shared regional appearance. Next, Solomon. Solomon ruled over Israel at the height of African and Arabian influence. His trade networks extended into Sheba, a kingdom located in what is now Ethiopia and Yemen, both populated by dark-skinned peoples. The Queen of Sheba's visit is not exoticized as encountering someone visually alien. There is no racial shock language. The exchange is diplomatic, intellectual, and mutual. If Solomon looked European and she was African, ancient writers would have mentioned it. They always did. They didn't. Then there's Jeremiah. Jeremiah is imprisoned and later rescued by Ebed-Melech, explicitly identified as a Cushite, an African. The text gives him a name, status, and authority. He speaks directly to the king and is trusted. This isn't background noise. It shows Africans embedded in Israelite power structures, not as outsiders, but as participants. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, skin tone language. Lamentations describes people whose skin became darker due to famine and hardship, using comparisons to soot and darkness. These descriptions only make sense if baseline skin tone was already brown to dark. You don't describe pale people becoming blackened unless darkness is already familiar and culturally meaningful. This isn't modern race talk. It's